Well, good morning, folks, and welcome to another edition of Friday Morning Live. Today is May 14th, 2021. We are so excited and glad you joined us for today's special session about the legislative update and our friend Carl Rockman from Citizens. So there's yours truly, Dave Newell. So welcome aboard. We're going to do a few housekeeping items, but I want to say, folks, we normally try to go about an hour, but today's session, both with Carl and certainly our special co-hosts, B.G. Murphy and Kyle Ulrich, we're probably going to go over. So just want to set the stage as we talk about these two topics today. So just a reminder, folks, FAI continues to offer many options, virtual learning, distance learning. So please check our website and our education page and see what's upcoming for the next few weeks. Just a reminder, folks, it's only a couple of weeks away, and certainly FAI is your resource for hurricane preparedness. We do have a disaster command post that's hosted on our website. We encourage you to go take a look, dust off your manual, check out anything else from the website that you need from us, and we'll be here to help and answer any questions. Again, June 1st is not far away, so now's the time to prepare and take advantage of some of the information FAI has to offer. So, part of the discussion today is about what's happening currently in the Florida property market. As most of you know through the blogs, last night, or 12:01 this morning, all American capital policies canceled, and coverage was, hopefully you were able to find coverage elsewhere. So Citizens has been very diligent in helping agents that have had some needs and using their underwriting guides and whatever, but certainly for most agents, they were able to find coverage elsewhere in the either in the private market or the E&S market. So just a reminder of that. And then, of course, the last couple weeks, we've had a few bulletins come out from the OIR with consent orders, Southern Fidelity, and then recently Gulfstream and Universal North America. So just want to bring in our friend Carl Rockman from Citizens. Bear with me for a minute, Carl. We've got to find your name now since many are on. So thanks for joining us again. But our friend Carl Rockman from Citizens will be on to kind of lead us through a discussion of what Citizens has been talking about and certainly working with FAIA, the office, and other stakeholders to try to find and create a plan for some of these policies as they transition from some of these carriers. And if you find a need to go to Citizens, which some of them will, Carl and the team have worked together, and a bulletin will be issued either late today or first thing Monday with clear guidance on what agents will be able to do to submit business and bind business if you find yourself in the need of using Citizens. So welcome, Carl.
Good morning, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yep. So just to set the stage, Carl, just so everybody kind of gets a good feel for what's going on in the current state of the Florida property market, what are you guys, Citizens, what are you guys seeing as far as weekly submissions? And if you could update us on what the current policy in force limitation is right now.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I'll give you the publicly reported numbers that we've given our Board of Governors. But to give the agents on the phone some perspective, March of 20, before the market really started to shift, and I think everyone really felt the shift early last year, new business and Citizens for that month was 9,254 new business policies. So just kind of keep 9,254 in mind. March of 20. March of 21, that number was 26,097 new business policies. We have seen exponential growth each month since March of 20. What's that equated to? We've gone from a policy in force count in March of 20 of 446 And as of the end of March, our policy in force count stands at 569. And our projections are that we'll be well north of 600,000, approaching 700,000 potentially by the end of this year. Now, that's a good and bad story, Dave. It's a bad news story because it does reflect a hardening market. It's a good news story in that Citizens is here to respond to the niche market needs that are out there, which we'll talk about. But we obviously spent years and a lot of time with agents moving the business out to the private market, right? We were at 1.4 million. We got down to 400,000. Looks like we're going to have an uptick again, but I want to remind every agent here, this too shall pass. And we are going to be about moving this business back out to the private market at some time when the markets heal. But for now, for today, we've got to talk about the matters at hand, Dave. And I think that's, really with Universal, Gulfstream, and Southern Fidelity. But no doubt we're seeing the growth. If agents are feeling the shift in their agencies in terms of lack of capacity, I know that a lot of agents are feeling that as well, and certainly it's reflected in our numbers. Okay,
yeah. Thanks for that overview, and Carl, let's get into the meat of the meeting today. Our discussion today is, what has Citizens built as far as a process and a situation where you are going to see some additional submissions come. Unfortunately, in the next 45 days, that number will increase quite a bit as the marketplace shifts. So what have you all kind of put together that'll kind of be in the bulletin that'll come out either today or Monday?
Sure. I'll provide the high-level guidance. The detail will be in the bulletin. So I would ask every agent, please pay attention to the bulletin that we intend to issue late today or Monday latest. But I'll give you the high-level things you can expect. First of all, we get it, but I want to let every agent know when these orders were issued, this is not like we had with Florida Specialty where it was an insolvency and we were ordered to take this business. That is not the case here. So let me clear that up with everybody now. While the office approved these companies to non-renew about 30,000 plus policies within 45 days for financial reasons, we were not directed nor ordered to take these as part of any rollover or automatic coverage process. Okay, so let's start there first. Okay, these folks all have a need. They have a 45-day need. But if anyone out there was wondering why because the office did not direct us to do that. So let's start there. Okay. The second piece is there is private market capacity out there. Even though it's a hardening market, Dave, we are hearing stories. We are hearing anecdotes. We're talking to agents about other partner carriers coming in with niche offers. Hopefully all of you are talking to your other marketing reps. I know it seems crazy, but when this amount of shopping happens in this short a period of time, there are companies out there that want to move on selected business, okay? And I know a lot of it is better than average, and so we're really letting the private market come in and clear out as quickly as possible and pick up as much of that as they can through rollovers, okay, and private placements. We obviously have also the clearinghouse as a need. So these policies will need to hit the clearinghouse. We do have our clearinghouse carriers obviously looking at the business coming through the clearinghouse to potentially make some niche offers. I don't hold out a lot of hope, folks. I get that. I know the markets are hard, but I want to let everybody know why aren't we seeing an automatic transfer for those very good reasons. Now, we do understand, though, in a 45-day window, these customers that may have issues with their property or other things are going to come up. All right, so let me just give you the high-level guidance we're going to be issuing, and then please read the bulletin when it comes up. All right. If we're going to do anything for you at all in this short window, we're going to give you the ability to defer certain underwriting requirements for the first 90 days. Okay. Things like inspections, win loss, the things that come up, okay, that we know you'll have a tough time getting, you'll see that in the guidance. Okay. Other things like applications, proof of prior insurance, premium, absolutely are going to be required. But please look at the guidance we issue. I think you'll find that it's a reasonable stance given the time frame that these people are under. But nonetheless, we're going to give you as much relief as we can from an underwriting standpoint to allow you to get this business to us, to get these folks some coverage before hurricane season, and then we'll work with you individually on fulfilling the requirements that you deferred in good order before that policy renews next year. A quick reminder on Citizens, for some of you that might be new to Citizens or need a quick refresher, remember on regular new business with Citizens with no issues or existing damage, if you put money on the policy, if you fund the policy and upload our document requirements, The policy is going to issue and you're going to get a deck page instantaneously. So if you're looking to get these customers moved into Citizens, just know that our current practices are with docs and money, we can move the business and get a policy issued for you, which I know all of you are interested in, okay? So I'll pause here for questions, Dave. I got a couple of closing comments, but I didn't want to go through too much. You had a question or?
I'm going to pose one, but the first one is, Carl, let's address some that may be new to having to access Citizens, maybe for the first time or hadn't used them in a while. There's certainly a lot of educational materials they can access, but more importantly, the appointment process. You know, what's that look like, and where can they find that information if they need a Citizens appointment to go ahead and conduct business?
If you go to our Citizens public website, there's a place called Programs and then Business to Business, and you'll just find there's a place for agents. If you want to appoint your agency, you can simply go to that website, just follow the prompts. The registration and appointment process has been significantly improved. We just encourage you to go to our public website and go ahead and apply your agency to become a Citizens agency. From that process, you'll then appoint your producers. There'll be a process for that. There is a fee associated with licensed producers of $125 per, but that's all inside of the appointment process. We are monitoring that. We have very, very good work condition, Dave, and we know the expedited appointment process is something that some agents might need. I would just encourage every agent out there, if you need an appointment with Citizens or need to put a producer on, get out to the website, go ahead and pop in the request. We're monitoring that, and we will do our best to get those appointment processes and requests expedited as quickly as possible. There is an education requirement we'd like all new agencies to take. It's about 45 minutes, but I think you'll want to have that education, that required education piece. It does walk you through all the things you need to know about doing business with Citizens, including our performance programs, our systems, eligibility guidelines. It's a lot in 45 minutes, but I would encourage you, you're going to need to take that to get to the toll gate and get appointed. But nonetheless, we're standing by and know that some of you out there might have a need for Citizens capacity. And I just need you to go to the public website, pop in the request, and we'll monitor it and get it out as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, a couple things, and certainly the questions are coming in, but, you know, Carl, we're going to get to as many as we can just in the short time we have for you today. But one of them is, you know, you and I spoke about some of this information that you all have seen regarding Gulfstream and Universal North America, and most of it, if not all of it, those policies selected did not have any open claims that the data concluded. But have an agent that just wrote us, and unfortunately, during some of this process, the insured did sustain some damage in the last few weeks. So how will you all view that potential risk and underwrite it now that they do have an open claim?
Well, there's two things in that response that we're working through. One, I'd like that agent, my email address is on the screen. I'd like that agent to give me some visibility on the specific customer. The order precludes these companies from non-renewing folks that have an open claim. Let's start there, okay? The issue is the timing, right? And the issue is when the claim open. So we're going to need to work through some of these individually, particularly depending on when the timing of the claim came in. Our general philosophy is they're not permitted to be non-renewed regardless of timing, but obviously that's a nuance, Dave, that we'll have to work out with the office. But we're going to obviously be very zoned to getting that completed. If for some reason, though, if for some chance Citizens has to do these, if they were late claims or just happened within the last couple of days, we have a program for existing damage open claim. We have a program for that. It does require the policy to come in unbound. It does require significant documentation of the existing damage, but we do have a solution, okay? So I just want to rest everybody out there that we have solutions for customers that might be caught up in a timing issue. We just need you to work with the reps from the companies to present that. Hey, I have an open claim. The office says you can't non-renew these. Please go to those carriers first. Let them have a chance to respond to that. And if there's a pushback or something where they don't think it's adequate, then you need to get us involved and let us help. Okay, so Dave, I think that's, I know we're going to have a handful of customers that are caught up in that, and we certainly acknowledge that's an issue, but that'll be a case by case, but not something that we want to stack up and take a lot of time on. But that's, but we do have a program. If there is a situation where there is damage, we have a program for that. It's just going to take a little bit more rigor from the customer and from the agent to get it underwritten.
Yeah, folks that are on the call are asking questions. We invited Carl on from Citizens to talk about the solution with some of what's going on in the Florida property market and some of the recent consent orders. We're going to switch gears very soon and bring in our team, our legislative team here at FAI in just a minute. So just bear with us, but we thought this was very important to have Carl on and talk about some of the things that Citizens has been working on to help agents in this short timeline. So just bear with us for just another minute. We'll let Carl go. I think the other thing, Carl, that we probably need to do, because there's a lot of questions that have come in that we're not going to get to right now, I'm going to go ahead and ship those over to you. We'll get those answered, and then we'll post those so all the agents on the call today will be able to see those answers as we go through. But I think more importantly, the bulletin is really going to spell out a lot of the answers anyway. So so either later today or so on and so forth. So that's where
we appreciate the opportunity just to have a broad dialogue, more detail to follow. My email's there. I will address all the questions. And this is just the beginning of the conversation on this. We do appreciate the time, Dave, to be able to reach out to the agents. And if you have other agenda items, that's great. I'll hang out for the balance of the call. If there's time to take questions, happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
So, folks, as we transition, the other part of the show is about the legislative update. Bring in our co-host, Kyle Ulrich, our president and CEO. Good morning, Kyle.
Good morning, everyone.
And then B.G. Murphy, our new friend, our new colleague here at FAI, led the charge down at the Capitol, but really not down at the Capitol because, we couldn't really go to the Capitol, but our Director of Government Affairs. Welcome, B.G.
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, everybody.
So here we are. Kyle, I guess we'll kind of lead this off with you. Just kind of give us an overview. Every year at session, we do a preview show, and now this is the post script that we talk about and fill in agents of what was accomplished and some of the pitfalls and some of the the backstory on some of these things. But I think this year more than ever, because of COVID, because of some that was happening and not being able to meet at the Capitol and do certain things that we normally would do to advocate on behalf of FAI members, we had to shift gears a little bit. And so I guess just talk about the leadership in both the House and the Senate and some of the things that we had to do a little differently this year to conduct our business.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dave. B.G. Murphy, Director of Government Affairs. So anytime you go into session, especially at the beginning of a new term, you really have to kind of prepare yourself for what may change. Every 2 years, the leadership of both the House and Senate change. And with this being the first year, you never know what to expect, how they may allow their committees to run, how they schedule things, and just everything in between. So this year we had a new Speaker of the House, Representative Chris Browse, and had a new Senate President in Senator Wilton Simpson. But obviously, as I mentioned, session is a difficult process in a normal year. This year was even more difficult. If you were on at the legislative preview and had an opportunity to hear, we had to battle with session protocols due to COVID-19. For the most part, the Capitol was shut down. If you wanted to attend committees for the Senate, you actually had to go down to the Civic Center. The House, there was an ability to go into committees at that point in time. However, you had to have a specific purpose to be there, whether you were invited to be there or you had you needed to testify, but at the end of the day, they still had to vet, the list of people who had applied to come into the committee. So there was no guarantees that you could be in. But even just in a normal year, so much of the work that we get done is done in the hallways. Not everything is a scheduled meeting during the 4 months of committee weeks in session. We become very good at stalking people, if you will. You go find legislators and wait for them as they come out of committee, and you take an opportunity to walk with them and talk about the issues that you're working on that are important. And that's just such a critically important component to how we do our business. Obviously, we didn't have the ability to do that this year. So what it did was it required you to have, well, not required, it kind of showed you which groups really did have meaningful relationships. You know, here at FAIA, we do a lot of work in the off season to make sure that we are creating new relationships with new members, but also continuing to grow on the relationships that we've already had. And in my short time, 10 months here at FAIA, I'm here to tell you that I don't know that anybody does it better, and think that's in large part to the work that Kyle's done over the past 16 years. So then you go into the possibility of passing legislation. And this is one thing that I always tell people, you know, it is difficult to pass a bill. And the reality of it is that's a good thing. If it was not easy to pass laws, we would likely have a lot of bad laws on the books. So each year, we here at FAIA have to take a look at kind of the whole picture. You know, there's competing interests between the two chambers. You know, you have leadership priorities issues that the speaker and president have identified as being issues of importance to their chambers. And then obviously we knew coming into session that there was going to be a tremendous amount of work done on COVID-19, albeit policy or budget issues. This year, there were 3,140 bills introduced this session, and of that, 275 passed. And that's staggering. That's a very low number of bills. But when you also take into consideration that, you know, for instance, bills that may have a public records component, anytime there's a policy bill that has any type of impacts on public records, it requires a separate bill to deal with the public records component of that policy bill. So when you take bills like that out that are, you know, the secondary bill that deals with public records and other types of bills that may be less substantial policy bills, that 275 bills that passed actually is far lower when it comes to meaningful public policy bills.
So yeah, Kyle, you know, now that you sit in the corner office and you had to, you know, you shifted gears, of course, brought BG in to be boots on the ground, and you've kind of, you know, stepped back just a little bit, got more engaged as the process went along. But, you know, from your vantage point, how did you look at this upcoming session?
Yeah, I mean, as BG said, I mean, every session's different. Every session has its own dynamic, and every session has, you know, certain issues that are kind of the things that are going to drive and take up much of the bandwidth and oxygen in the room. And it was only complicated by COVID. But I think BG did a really nice job of kind of laying out kind of what we had to deal with and the inherent advantages like that a group like FAI has. I mean, we work very, very hard on our political program. You know, people I hear it occasionally, people say, and it must be nice to only have to work 60 days a year. And you can't help but laugh at comments like that. And while those 60 days are difficult and they can be, you know, very long days, the truth is your success, whether it's FAI or anyone else for that matter, is entirely predicated on what you do the other 10 months of the year. You don't just show up the first day of session and expect to be able to have access and relationships with people without doing work the other 10 months out of the year. And so, you know, thankfully, our members give us all of the resources that we need to be able to do what we do and what we have been known for doing for years and years and years. And it was obviously a little different also in that I wasn't doing it day to day. You know, while BG came to us with an awful lot of experience, having worked for 2 CFOs and also in the private sector, started his career as legislative aide. He knew the issues, he knew the process, but lacked the perspective. You know, you can hear about these issues in other jobs, but until you actually, you know, sit down in this office and talk to our members, you don't understand the agent perspective. And so, you know, I wasn't sure how involved I was going to need to be. Obviously, I've been doing it for a long time, and with term limits, new members come in every 2 years, you have, probably 30 to 40 new members of the House of Representatives and a couple in the Senate. And so there's a fair amount of turnover. However, there are also people that I have relationships with that I've worked with for a long time that I knew that at some point there would likely be the need for me to be able to leverage those relationships and get meetings and talk to people. And so I did that, where needed. But BG and Laura and the rest of our contract lobbying team, really, they handled the bulk of the work and did a phenomenal job. Those of you who haven't, read my blog, they batted 1,000. I mean, every single priority that was on our legislative plan of work was accomplished, whether that was passing something or keeping something from passing. And I'm sure it's happened in the past. I can't recall a time where we were able to accomplish that. And so all it took was just, kind of a change of leadership, I suppose. Someone
As BG's
else.
laughing over there.
Right.
I've told Kyle to start calling me the Ty Cobb of interests.
But I am. I mean, sitting in the seat that I sit in now, I couldn't be more proud of the accomplishments that our team had this year. And I think it ultimately, what's the goal? I mean, the goal is to make a better day for our members. And there were an awful lot of things that won't get headlines in the newspapers, that aren't property insurance reform, that will have a meaningful impact for our members and alleviate some of the burdens that they have found themselves having to deal with over time. So again, I'm incredibly proud of our team. It was strange for those that were intimately involved every day. It was strange for me not being intimately involved every day. That meant an awful lot of calls, texts, and emails from BG on a pretty regular basis, keeping me informed as to what was going on. And then, also saying, okay, now's the time, Kyle. I need you to step in here and, can you call so-and-so or can you set this meeting up? And it was fun. I enjoyed, kind of getting back into the fold to a little bit of an extent there at the end and playing maybe a little bit of a small role to help things get through the process. But all in all, it was a good year.
Yeah. Well, folks, you heard Kyle talked about the wealth of information and support that we get from our members. Part of that, Kyle, is that we have a process around here and we talk about these priorities and we have a pretty good plan of work that we develop each year. And the legislative end of that is part of that discussion. And certainly we'll do that again in August at our summer leadership conference. So certainly, folks, if you're looking for to get more engaged in the legislative process, we encourage you to join us for that event. But as we look at the screen, Kyle, these are the priorities that our legislative council and certainly our board of directors decided were the needs and wants for members of our association.
Yeah,
so,
that came from all of our members.
Exactly.
This isn't just the legislative council or the board of directors, sitting down at a table and coming up with ideas. These are ultimately a compilation of things that come to us throughout the year from all of our members, and we keep those. We put them on the agenda to be discussed by the legislative council. There are some that rise to the level of being included in our legislative plan of work, and others that do not.
Right.
But yeah, without a doubt, our volunteer governance structure and the input that we get from our members is what drives everything that we do, whether it's legislative or any other part of the association. That feedback that we receive and input that we get from members is what drives the direction of this association. And so, to the extent that you haven't in the past and you have something that matters to you, I would encourage you to tell us about it. The one thing about batting 1,000 is we don't have any things that roll over from one year to the next, and so we've got a blank slate of time to be able to devote to issues in the upcoming session. And it's it's a relatively short turnaround. It may not seem like it, but session will be here before we know it because it'll be in January of next year. And so, as you said, we'll be down in South Florida in August for summer leadership. And between now and then, I would encourage you to reach out to me, reach out to BG, Laura, or anybody else on our team to make us aware of issues in the marketplace that we should be thinking about putting on our legislative plan of work for the upcoming year.
Yep. Well, let's go through some of the wins, right? BG and Kyle, certainly this has been a topic around these parts for a while when we went to a 5-hour law and update class, and certainly listen to our members and certainly listen to the instructors that were teaching that on a regular basis. And we're able to, again, get a win here out of reducing that 5-hour requirement down to 4 hours. BG, can you kind of enlighten us a little bit about that discussion?
Absolutely. And real quickly, before I get into the meat of the DFS agency package, I do want to piggyback on something that Kyle said, which is perspective and membership engagement. I have had a unique opportunity to work with the regulatory entity. I've obviously worked for a carrier as well, and now find myself with the agent network. And I remember a conversation with Kyle over the summer, and I've heard it said 1,000 times. I heard CFO Atwater say it, and subsequently I heard CFO Petronas say it. And everybody loves their agents. And because of that, and because of the perspective that we look at issues, we truly are a consumer driven body. We really think about issues from the perspective of the consumer, and certainly carriers do as well, and the regulators do as well. But that's our sole focus, and I think that's critically important. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that when we started our journey on property insurance reforms earlier this year, the chairman of the House Commerce Committee was insistent that there was an agent on the panel. Wanted to make sure that members of that committee had an opportunity to hear that agent's perspective and how consumers are being impacted by the variables in the marketplace. And it's one thing to be on the other side of the table as FAIA when I was at DFS, and now to be here in person, while I had an appreciation to it coming into it, I never could have imagined or hoped for a better opportunity to be with FAIA. So going on, and just one quick note, and I'll go ahead and just say this is to get ahead of any questions that may come in. All of the bills that we're going to discuss today, with the exception of one provision in the DFS agency bill and also the PIP repeal bill, all of those bills become effective July 1st. Currently, the posture where all of these bills are is all the bills that we're about to discuss have been passed by the legislature. And just for those who may not keep as much or pay as much attention to the process and how it works from a procedural standpoint, at the end of session, when a bill is sent to the governor outside of session, he has 14 days to act on that bill. And when I say act on that bill, he can either sign it and approve it, he can allow the bill to become law without signing it, or he can veto the bill. The legislature, what they do in an effort to give the governor's office some time to kind of carefully review the final product of the bills, because many of them change in the final days of session, is they'll send them in clusters. So you'll see some of the bigger priority bills of the legislature get sent over earlier during session, but all of our bills are currently passed out of the legislature and are ready to be sent to the governor. And the first one I'll highlight is House Bill 1209, which was the Department of Financial Services Agency package. And really this bill contained the bulk of our kind of FAIA specific provisions. As Dave mentioned, it's a reduction in the 5-hour course that all of you have to take every 2 years as part of your update course. Good news for those listening, that course will go from 5 hours to 4 hours. However, your overall number of hours does not decrease. That hour that is taken away from the update course is reallocated for your use to to work on different elective coursework on specialized issues. We also were successful in repealing the diligent effort requirements for the export of personal line flood policies. This was an issue that was also contained in kind of the one insurance bill that didn't make it across the finish line this year, which was the insurance omnibus bill. But after discussions internally and with the department, we decided to place that within 2 bills to make sure that we had the best possible chances of getting that across the finish line. So we were successful in repealing that process. And there was another one. Agents are required anytime they export personal property risks over to the E&S market, they're required to provide a disclosure saying that coverage may be available and may be less expensive at Citizens. And that, that one gained a little bit of attention in that, when we're looking at where we are in the marketplace with how quickly Citizens is growing, many saw that as one last chance to try and to get policies back into Citizens. And that certainly does not fall within the confines of the intent of Citizens being the market of last resort. The big issue that we've talked about, I know has been discussed on Friday Morning Live. If you've taken a class with David Thompson, you've heard it, was the issue that many of our agents are dealing with, which is being asked for by lending entities, whether that's brokers, loan originators, or anybody else in the lending industry, asking you all for replacement cost estimators, and in some instances, other proprietary business information. And we spent a lot of time on this issue when we first started going down this road. We really wanted to take the approach of not putting any type of new requirement or burden on an agent. So we met with the Office of Financial Regulation over the summer. We met with the Florida Bankers Associations and others, and found that we had a lot of agreement amongst all those involved in this issue, and that you all should not be having to provide that information, as oftentimes your appointment contract specifically states you can't do it. I'll tell you anecdotally, shortly after starting here, I was talking to one of our agents, and he shared a correspondence with a loan originator that he had received, and the email simply put said, "I will continue to ask for this information until the legislature specifically says I can't." So we said, you know what, challenge accepted, and we did that. So as I mentioned, we worked with the Office of Financial Regulation on that issue, and we're hopeful to do something in their statutes. However, as many of you know or may not know, they only really have regulatory oversight over state chartered banks and credit unions. So because of that, had we gone that approach, many of the national lending entities would still have the ability to ask you all for that information, in some cases demand it. So we said, you know what, we're just going to prohibit agents from providing it. And the good news is that now moving forward, should this bill get signed by the governor, you all will have a statute that you can point to and say, sorry, I can't do it. Doesn't prevent you from asking, but I cannot do it. So that was a really important issue. And then the last issue was one that we've talked about over the years, which is the issue that we have with some that, may not be as easy to work with on getting agents appointed. And this is even dating back to my time at the Department of Financial Services, was a priority for Greg Thomas, the division director over there, and making sure that the agencies were properly appointing agents. And under current law, the problem with that is that anytime the division identified an insurer who may not be appointing their agents, the DFS had to actually refer that over to the Office of Insurance Regulation. Obviously, they've got a lot of things that they oversee there. So, Greg really wanted to have the ability to work with carriers to make sure that they are properly appointing their agents, and think we should see some really good outcomes from that.
Yeah. Hey, Donald, the 5-hour course that we're going to have at convention is still a requirement. This particular provision of this bill will not go into effect till January the 1st. So up until then, if you're in your cycle and you find yourselves needing the class, until January the 1st is when it will shift from a 5 to a 4. So certainly look forward to seeing you at convention. And BG and Laura and the team will be there doing the 5-hour class. So, hey, BG, we got a big shout out from John about eliminating that DE on flood. So, congratulations again, and thanks, John, for those good wishes. So, as we transition to the next thing, the next slide, again, some priorities on this list were things that were brought to us, Kyle, from our team, our agents, our partners that found that they were struggling with some of these issues and wanted us to take a good hard look at them.
Yeah, so the first thing here relating to subrogation and community associations is something that we've actually been working on for, I think this is the third year. This is something that became a real problem for a lot of our members who found themselves in a situation where, their insured, who was, the condo unit owner, had a claim was adjusted, adjudicated, paid, and the homeowner thought, okay, we're done. Great. Only to be provided notice that they were a party to a lawsuit where there are now subrogation demands being made of their own community association. And the practice became pretty pervasive amongst some carriers. And it just, this is one of those things where you end up having to do a fair amount of research to go back and find out why this happens, how it happens, so forth. There was a big change in the community association statute and the condo association statute as it relates to insurance requirements back in, I think, 2010. And up to that point, subrogation between those two parties had, not been allowed. As many of you know, the subrogation is waived in the master policy under the standard ISO form. And so when that changed in 2010 and allowed for subrogation to happen between the unit owner policy and the master policy, one, it put our agents in a bad spot because, now they have a customer who's saying, hey, wait a second here. You told me this was all taken care of. And now I'm the person who, there's common ownership in the community associations. And so in many ways, it's actually the homeowners kind of feel like they're suing themselves in some ways. And, you can get some nasty looks from your fellow, folks in your neighborhood or condominium association or board members and so forth. So really, we just felt like there was really kind of an inequity in the way that this was being applied, and it put agents and consumers in a bad spot, and just felt like there should be some bilateralism here. Like if one can't do it, the other shouldn't.
Right,
and we could never find back in 2010, any sort of record of this being discussed and the public policy reason for shifting away from subrogation being not allowed by either party. And so it did take some time. We had some pushback from not only carriers who were, engaging in this practice, but also from the real property and probate trust section of the Florida Bar, who were concerned about, what implications and ramifications this change would have. Thankfully, again, I wasn't able to do it for 2 years, and BG comes in and gets it done in his first year. So kudos to him. But it some of these things they take time. They take education, and we had some great partners in CAI, the Community Associations Incorporated Group, and many of the other condo associations, and many of our members that deal with this on a very routine and regular basis. And so we finally got to a point where this issue had kind of been normalized, I would say. Many more folks in the legislature understood the issue and agreed with our public policy position that if one can't do it, the other one shouldn't be able to do it. And that's what this says. It says that if the master policy doesn't allow for subrogation, then the unit owner policy can't subrogate. Now, if there happens to be a master policy that allows it, then you could do it. But at least now it's an even and equal playing field that both parties are standing on. Because, you're really just shifting the claim from one to another. It's either going to be the obligation of the HO6 policy, or it's going to be the obligation of the master policy. And what we found is that in most of these cases, these subrogation claims fall underneath the deductible of the liability policy for the condominium association. And so these were claims in many cases that were having to be paid straight out of surplus of the community association. That means then without those resources or surplus that the association had, there's simply an assessment to all of the owners. So everyone in the community association is paying for it.
Right. Folks, yes, we are going to get to property reform. We're going to get to some of the things that that hopefully will litigation fairness, tort reform, some of those things. Just bear with us for a minute. We just want to get through a few more of the
we're getting
priorities.
We're getting very close.
Yeah, we're getting very close. So, BG, Senate Bill 1598, Consumer Protection Bill. What's the background of that particular piece of legislation?
Absolutely, and I'll be expeditious on the next two. So this was another issue that many of our agents brought to us, and as you all know, anytime that you're required to get a signed disclosure before transferring the risk into the E&S market, the statute read that you may be able to find superior coverage at a lesser price in the admitted market. And obviously, everyone on this call understands that better than anybody. They have vetted all of their options in the admitted market, and the reality of it is if they're looking at the E&S market, it's because they weren't able to place the risk. So that disclosure form really stood to confuse the consumers. They asked the question, then why are you doing what you're doing? Well, we run through all of our options. Unfortunately, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it, this likely is the only option. So this was an issue that we've been working on for quite some time, and we're able to get that done this year. And then just real briefly on Senate Bill 72, and I do want to amend one of my previous statements, which is that all bills become, with the exception of the one provision in the DFS bill and the PIP bill, becoming effective July 1st, Senate Bill 72, COVID-19 liability protections, actually became effective upon the governor's signature, which happened during the session. And the bill did a lot of things, but the most important thing was it provided a safe harbor for businesses who were making a good faith effort to comply with public safety health guidelines. This issue was an interesting one because agents had two different ways to look at it: is small businesses themselves hosting consumers in their office and wanting to make sure that they weren't subject to excess exposure due to someone claiming they caught COVID in the agency, but also is the network that is underwriting these policies for many of these businesses and making sure that we did everything that we could to mitigate any unnecessary liability in the marketplace.
So as we're about to shift gears to strictly talk about the property insurance reform bill, but BG Kim from Coastal says, great job on Senate Bill 630. Certainly that's something that was a priority for her and her group. So great job there. And the next question that came in, you talk about effective dates and some of the bills and when they come into law, so to speak. Is there a way for members to follow when the bills actually go to the governor for action?
So if you've kept up with my blogs over session, we kept you all up to speed through our tracking sheet of when bills were scheduled to be in committees and so forth. We have not recently published that, which I will do moving forward, as none of the bills have been sent to the governor. So we'll be making sure to keep that tracking sheet updated so you all can see when these bills are sent, keeping in mind that he has a period of time once he receives them to actually act on the bill. But as we start to get updates on when those bills are sent, we'll make sure to publish the updated tracking sheet so you all can see where they're at.
Okay, well, folks, Senate Bill 76, property insurance reform, and we're going to bring our friend in, Kyle Ulrich, to kind of, reset the stage here and talk about from his vantage point and a lot of the conversations, a lot of the meetings, a lot of the text messages that Kyle's been engaged in on this topic, not only pre-session, during session, and now actually post-session, Kyle, to so just kind of frame the conversation for our members about, what really came out of this session and certainly how our members need to look at this piece of legislation.
Well, I'll say that every member may look at it slightly differently, much like many of the carriers in the marketplace are looking at it differently. Property insurance reform, I think back, and it's an interesting sort of case study, and like the time that I started at FAI and the time that BG started at FAI. And BG had a leg up on me in that he actually knew how to spell insurance before coming here. But I started in 2004 and in August of 2004. And in the following 16 months, there were 8 hurricanes that hit the state of Florida. And I had no choice but to learn property insurance, homeowners insurance at a very, very quick pace. I think in many ways, BG, has had that same situation where he has walked in to a place here at FAI understanding the market, knowing generally who the players were and stuff like that, but not really ever having seen, the impact that this has on our members and their customers. And so I know that how long have you been here with us, BG? Since August, what is that, like 8 months? Something like that?
About 10 months. Best 10 months of your life.
Yeah, something like that. He's had no choice but to basically, drink from a fire hose and learn all of these issues and has done a great job getting up to speed. But we have seen this before. This is the unfortunate thing about being in Florida is that, anybody on this call who has been doing this for any length of time knows that we go through cycles here in Florida where, times can be really good and times can be really bad. I think that this is probably about the worst situation I've ever seen in the Florida marketplace, in my time, the last 16 years. And in fact, I called my friend and predecessor, Jeff Grady, the other night and just said to him, I said, Jeff, this is like every day there's something new. I mean, have you ever seen the market? Ever witnessed a market that is this bad? He said, no, Kyle, the truth is I came in 98 and heard the horror stories of post Andrew. But even the market situations that I, saw in my time where, post 0405, sinkhole, those types of things, he didn't feel like the market had been as bad as it is right now. And that's kind of strange to say in that, there was a time around 2010, 2011, where, as Carl said, there were 1.4, almost 1.5 million policies and citizens. And now we have, what will be approaching 750,000 by the end of this year in all likelihood. So one could stand to, reason or make and I draw the conclusion that, oh, well, it's not as bad. I think it is, and I think it's worse. I mean, I think that what you're seeing right now is more troublesome for consumers and for agents because of some of the extraordinary actions that the Office of Insurance Regulation is having to take with, very short-term notice in these consent orders and having to replace, blocks of business in excess of 20,000 policies, and that's been going on for the better part of a year and a half. Unfortunately, coming right off the heels of assignment of benefits reform, when we had all hoped that that would help the health of the marketplace, only to see what many of us probably knew was going to happen, and that is the shift away from third-party lawsuits to first-party lawsuits. So yeah, I mean, I'm not telling anybody on this call anything that they don't know when I say, the marketplace is in shambles. And, I hate to do it. I published another blog this morning that's, kind of another recent take on the market and the dynamics and things that are happening. And I have tried over, the last 8 months or so of being president CEO of, as we always have, not to say that that's a seismic shift, but to call it how it is and not to give false hope to our members. I don't want people to think that, with this change, everything in the marketplace is going to get better. It's going to take time. And unfortunately, I have said consistently that the market is probably going to get worse before it gets better. Yep. And that has happened. And I think will continue to happen. Unfortunately, right now we find ourselves in a time where, despite legislative reforms that we'll talk about what they were, but we're heading into hurricane season. Yep. We're 3 weeks away from hurricane season starting, and that is a time in which most of the domestic market is out in the marketplace right now in London and Bermuda trying to get their reinsurance contracts and treaties buttoned up and signed. And so I think that a lot of what you're seeing right now in the marketplace, at least in the consent orders, is as a direct result of not only the state of the marketplace, the health of the marketplace, but the reliance on reinsurance that the domestic market has, and the fact that those terms, and many times, are just dictated to the companies. And so, I believe that there are conversations happening in London and Bermuda right now where they're saying, "Hey, we have plenty of capacity, and pricing is actually decent." Based on what I've heard anecdotally, is that unlike last year, reinsurance pricing will be relatively flat. It will be, maybe slightly up depending on what your company book looks like. But when they say we have capacity and here's the pricing, the next, part of that conversation is, but all of that is predicated on you getting off of this number of policies. And so I think that's the dynamic that you're seeing in the marketplace right now. Obviously, it causes great strain and, difficulty for our members to try to replace. I was talking to a member of ours earlier this week who has 900 policies with one of the companies that is under a consent order. So, they will have to replace 900 policies between now and the end of June. It's hard enough in this marketplace to renew and move business due to changing underwriting guidelines, much less the daunting task of moving 900 at the same time, which is why, and again, I want to say thank you to Carl Rockman for joining us this morning. The timing could not be better to keep our members up to date on the conversations that we have been having with citizens, the conversations that Citizens is having internally and with regulators, to try to play that role in the marketplace to help consumers and ultimately our agents find a place for some of this business that otherwise, won't find a home in the private market. So, it's with that backdrop that, the legislature started talking about property insurance reform this year. It took us 7 years to get assignment of benefits reform done. I don't think the industry didn't have the luxury of it taking years to get something done. And I think that there was an understanding by legislative leaders of the level of the crisis. I mean, that's the first hurdle you have to overcome, right? I mean, I say this all the time, and many of you have probably heard me say it, the legislature by its nature is a reactionary body. Right? You may not, like that, and it's not meant to be untoward or demeaning to the legislature. They just are. I mean, and that's the way that most governments are, is that they're reactionary to the crisis at hand rather than being kind of visionary and out in front of things. The nature of the beast. But oftentimes it can take years to be able to articulate the level of crisis that an industry or issue may rise to for the legislature. There was a realization by both leaders, both the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, that if nothing was done, then we would be in a really, really bad place. And so that's the real starting point, is that there was a recognition and realization by those leaders. Then, we are incredibly fortunate to to have members of FAI, insurance agents, in the legislature. To be able to have folks like Senator Jim Boyd and Senator Doug Broxson in that chamber who can articulate to their colleagues what they're facing on a daily basis and the needs of Florida consumers. You cannot overestimate how much that matters. And, our friend, Senator Jim Boyd, was just instrumental in getting this done. And he passed a bill through the Senate that frankly flew through in a way that I've never seen before, especially considering the provisions that were included that are always extraordinarily controversial. And so, what's the holy grail? What's the holy grail of property insurance reform in Florida? I mean, that's attorney fee reform. It's tort reform. And the influence that the trial bar has here in Florida is huge. I mean, they are the 10,000 pound gorilla that gives huge amounts of money to members of the legislature and have an awful lot of influence. And we as an industry and the business community has to overcome that. And so I think that if you asked any of our, company partners or business lobbyists, anybody that has been around for any period of time, and you ask them what the chances of getting attorney fee reform are this year, I would be shocked if any of them told you that they really thought that there was a chance to get that done. And because I'll be honest, and he's a friend, Speaker Chris Sprowls, there are some people that believe that he would never do that. And I always felt like he was open to having a conversation.
Right.
And if you could display and give the data and the facts to support the need to do it, that he would be willing to go down that road. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, we ended up passing a property insurance reform bill with, the help of many. None of these things happen, but with one person being responsible for it. And, the work that Citizens did and their team providing data, the work that the commissioner did, and the work that the governor's office did in, trying to articulate the priorities and things that would be meaningful, are the reason that all of this got done. And so, that's the backdrop. That's the background. I'll kind of maybe turn it over to BG and we can go through, there's some of these key provisions in the bill and talk a little bit about how they changed. I'm sure everybody has read, how Senate passed their bill 76 and it had everything. I mean, it was, and I've said this before, BG probably gets tired of me saying it, but I mean, that bill, in my opinion, was like unicorns and rainbow stuff. I mean, that's the possibility of that bill passing with attorney fee reform modeled after Texas hail legislation, also ACV on roofs, also contingency fee multiplier. I don't personally believe that was realistic, but that sets expectations for some.
Right.
Some see that and say, wow, there's a chance that this is what we're going to get. And I just personally don't believe that was ever realistic to think that was going to happen. Obviously, the House had a slightly different position, which is a complete juxtaposition of the situation we find ourselves in typically. Typically, it is the House that takes the very aggressive track on all things tort reform and or property insurance reform. And this year it was the exact opposite. It was the Senate leading the way with much more aggressive reforms that were ultimately through the legislative process. This is the world in which we live. It takes compromise. And again, there are some that believe, well, I believe it wasn't everything that we needed to get, but there are certainly varying opinions on the efficacy and what the outcome will be as a result of the bill. Only time will tell on how this really does, play out in the marketplace.
Okay. Well, thanks, Kyle, for laying the groundwork of property insurance reform and some of the nuances that we've had to overcome during the session. But BG, bringing you in, Senate Bill 76, some of the key provisions we have up on the screen talk about the prohibition on solicitations. And that's certainly something that FAIA has been engaged in I've been here 13 years, and it's been something that we've had to deal with and certainly have passed along many of these solicitations onto the department. So give us a little background on that provision.
Absolutely. And real quickly, and Kyle hit the nail on the head, when you look at major reforms across any industry, they are oftentimes the product of a multi-year conversation. At the end of the day, they're a product of compromise. And you hear legislators say it all the time that, if everyone's just a little bit upset, that means they're doing something good. So as you hear kind of different narratives on the efficacy of this bill, it's important to acknowledge what's not in this bill, and I'll hit on that in a minute. But you really have to take a look at what we were successful with getting done. The first big one was a prohibition on solicitations. Over at FAIA was just some of the examples of the solicitation tactics that were used. Offering a $500 Ruth's Chris gift card to allow them to get up on your roof. Oftentimes offering some type of inducement that's the equivalency to your deductible is in an effort to get you to file a claim. To many of our insureds, they know to look out for that, but there's many Floridians out there who don't understand. And when someone comes up to their door and says, hey, you have roof damage, let me get up there and look. here's this gift card. They don't know any better. They just know what they're being told. So under the leadership of really Speaker Sprowls, this was a priority to him, was to make sure that, we were doing everything we could to clamp down on those abusive and I'll just say it, fraudulent solicitation tactics. So they gave the Department of Business and Professional Regulation regulatory authority to really start dropping the hammer on some of these individuals. I'll tell you, I had two of our members, 2 different days this week, send me a letter that one of their insureds had received in the mail. And it was funny because it was the exact same form, but it was from 2 different parts of the state. And the language was saying that time is running out. You need to file your claim now. You have damage, and started talking through all the optics of being able to get an entire roof replaced for them. And it's just wrong, and it's misleading. And to many of the homeowners across the state, they don't know any better. And the House and the Senate as well wanted to really clamp down on that. The next one was a provision in the bill, which was really, I think, is an important component here. Oftentimes when we look at these major issues, albeit in property, auto, or whatever it is, it's oftentimes difficult to get meaningful data. Data is a necessity when you get these issues done. You can't go in and advocate based off anecdotal information. You really have to have meaningful information. Some information we currently track, anytime someone files a case against an insurer, they're required to also serve process on the Department of Financial Services, and they've got a database that was very instrumental in a lot of the data that was used back in 2019 on AOB reforms. They were able to track how many of these litigated cases had an AOB involved. So the legislature said, listen, we want to address these issues, but we want to make sure that we are getting meaningful data. And with different carriers collecting data differently, they wanted to create some uniformity amongst all of them to make sure that they were capturing meaningful data. The next one I'll hit on real briefly was a conversation that really kind of arose a little bit later in the process, which was the ability for the Office of Insurance Regulation to have a holistic look at MGAs. And much of what's in the bill was intended to kind of codify the current authority that they have, but to just make sure that, as they're looking at rates, that they have the opportunity to get a full financial outlook of the company, both through the carrier itself and then, partner MGA. Moving on, contractors are not the only ones who are out there soliciting, but it's also as public adjusters. So they said, we're not going to crack down on one without cracking down on the other. And, they wanted to make sure that, again, that public adjusters who may be canvassing neighborhoods, weren't offering any type of inducement to get someone to allow them to get up on their roof and try and file a claim. One of the big issues that really caught a lot of attention was the claims filing deadline. So under current law, a consumer, an insured, has 3 years to file a claim in catastrophic losses. So 3 years from the date of loss. For all non-catastrophic losses, that period is 5 years. Looking across the country, Florida's period was much longer than their peer states. You take a look at a state like Louisiana, they require you to file a claim within 6 months. There are some states that don't have any timeline that, basically force you to file it immediately. So they took a look at that and decided to bring both of those down to 2 years. And as you all know, the longer time that passes, the more opportunities there are for fraud to get involved in these claims. They brought both of those down to 2 years. As that issue progressed throughout session, there was the question was brought to the attention of many of the public policymakers of how do we handle supplemental claims. And while that may have been a red herring, they wanted to make sure that if additional damage was found due to the underlying loss after that statute of limitations had passed, that we made sure that we gave an opportunity for those claims that were related to the underlying loss to be taken care of. as you all know, there's no good property insurance discussion without talking about Citizens. And again, thank you to Carl for being on the call this morning. You know, the work that they're doing over there to help our agents work through this marketplace is just so incredible. They took a look at several different issues within Citizens. One of the things that they did is they gave Citizens the ability to price for reinsurance for a 1 in 100 year storm. Did not put a requirement on them to purchase for that reinsurance, but wanted to make sure that they did have the ability to get that reinsurance coverage as it's needed. Another one of the issues that was very difficult, and I'll hit two of these at the same time, was an increase in the glide path and an increase in the eligibility threshold. Anytime we talk about Citizens, Miami-Dade County, legislators from Miami-Dade County and Monroe County are hypersensitive. A large contingency of their constituents find themselves in Citizens, and because of that, they just look at Citizens differently. We had one member testify during this year that Citizens should be competitive and should be a viable option for anybody. And I don't think that was ill-intentioned, but I think that the reality of it is Miami-Dade and Monroe County, their exposure to hurricanes oftentimes does make Citizens the carrier of first resort. But what they did with the glide path is they increased that from 10 to 15%. It'll increase by 1% per year over the next 5 years. They also increased the eligibility threshold from 15% to 20%. And as we were talking about this, because the Citizen stuff was put into the House bill actually back in the first committee stop, is that while that is good public policy, Citizens should be charging actuarially sound rates. If not, they need to make sure that they have sufficient rate to cover their exposure. But we worked with them and helped them to understand that, the reality of it is no matter what we do with Citizens, it will not matter if we don't address the underlying issues that exist in the admitted market, because everyone will be eligible for Citizens, as they won't be able to find coverage within 20%. So certainly understood and appreciated the public policy behind the Citizens reforms, but it did present an opportunity to have more discussions on the underlying issues in the bill, is that, no matter what we do with Citizens, if we don't continue to work towards addressing the issues in the admitted market, it may fall short by just addressing Citizens. And then the next one, as Kyle mentioned, the Holy Grail, the one-way attorney fee reform in the pre-suit notice. And I'll hit on the latter first. The pre-suit notice is a really interesting issue. And, Florida's ICA, Tasha Carter, actually testified on this in one of the committees. And she's been tracking the propensity or the percentage of claims where the first notice of loss is delivered to carriers at the same time as the lawsuit. And she said enough. That can't be the case. We can't put the carriers in the position of where they are finding out about the claim and finding out they're being sued at the same time. Carrier hasn't had an opportunity to talk with the insured, hasn't had an opportunity to get an adjuster out and take a look at the damage. And they're putting them in a position that they're guilty until proven innocent. It wasn't a fair shake. So current law and law under this bill, a carrier has 90 days to make a determination of coverage, whether they're going to accept the claim or deny the claim. And what this language does is it says, either at the 90 days, if they wait until 90 days, which, in speaking to many of the carriers across the state, the majority of them do not take that long to make a determination of coverage. But from the point in time that a carrier makes a determination of coverage, they would then have a 10-day period wherein they receive a pre-suit notice, which outlines the demands, outlines, what's being addressed, what part of the claim is being disputed, and really gives a carrier an opportunity to work with their insured to try and make it right before this goes to litigation. Coupling that with the one-way attorney fee reform, again, as Kyle so eloquently said, this is unicorns and rainbows, but we got it. And it is a monumental tort reform, something that we've always talked about, but we may have said publicly or felt that there was a hope. This is just one of those issues deep down in your gut. You just wonder if we'll ever get And fortunately for us all, we were successful in getting that done this year. And the hope there is that with the pre-suit notice requirements and the one-way attorney fee reform, is that it maybe in time will tell, as Kyle mentioned, but the hope is maybe that takes away the automatic nature. You know, when you take a look at litigation information, so much of it is actually pre-suit settlements. It's not cases that have necessarily made it to the courthouse, and carriers, once they've been hammered with one-way attorney fees, you know, in some instances they've been hammered with a multiplier, you know, they just become a little skittish in taking, because the reality of it is for far too long, Florida's statutory and common laws have tipped the scale in favor of a ANSI trial bar. So the hope is that this will give an opportunity to carriers to really work with their insured and put their best foot forward and make sure that they have an opportunity to go through the claims process without this threat of one-way attorney fees hovering over their heads. But as Kyle mentioned, you know, this bill was a great step in the right direction, but you also have to take into consideration some of the things that did not end up in the bill. You know, the roof scam, the free roof scam, is really the guiding point of discussion as we worked on this issue this year. You know, a terrible Supreme Court case back in 2017 under the former makeup of the Supreme Court substantially changed how carriers adjust these claims. I mean, it really opened up the door for these, you know, roofers. And again, I'm not painting an entire industry with a broad stroke, but for roofers and adjusters to go out and force carriers to provide a brand new roof on a home that may have had minimal damage, but the reality of it is the overarching problem was the fact that the roof was 25 years old. And it really is, as some policymakers said throughout this session, it really substantially changed how people look at their insurance contract. Looked at it less as a contract providing coverage for a covered loss and more as an extended warranty contract. So we were hopeful to see something on roofs, but the ACV depreciation schedule was just a difficult issue. Our plan of work was to support reforms that had a depreciation schedule based off the roof material and age, but it was just a difficult issue. And as we worked through the process, even some of our own members came forward and expressed concerns that we may be taking away a coverage that is provided to consumers to try and fix an alternative issue. I would also say that the same individuals and those that we talked to in the legislature also understood the importance of addressing the issue. So I have a feeling in my gut, you know, we'll likely be back next year talking about roofs again as we look through what options may exist to really shut down this sham of forcing carriers to provide roof replacements. And the other big one that didn't end up in the bill was the multiplier. Public policy makers would say that, you know, carriers didn't have the data to show. I don't necessarily disagree, but tend to disagree to some extent, as I talked with several admitted carriers who shared their data and their experience with the multiplier and had countless you know, examples of letters that contained a threat of a multiplier. And you know, once, as I mentioned earlier, once a carrier gets hammered with one of those, they're just a little skittish about putting themselves in that situation again. There is a fear that, you know, now that we are in this world where people won't have an automatic 100% of their fees, the contingency fee multiplier may become more commonplace in an effort to try and get maybe their 40% of fees back up to 100%. And again, you know, we'll wait and see how these issues shake out in the courts. But to understand what's important about this bill is also understanding the issues that weren't addressed and will likely arise again next session.
Well, thanks, BG. And let's just get to a couple questions before we switch gears to our last piece of legislation. Folks, we're in the process of finalizing our legislative summaries. And so those documents will be posted on our website, and you'll be able to see a lot of information about each one of these provisions in the bills. And then certainly some dialogue will also lead you in a direction of, you know, some of the backdrop. And then, Kyle, you know, our friend Ed just would like, you know, maybe a little bit more on, the one-way attorney fee provision that was a success in this session?
Sure. So in many ways, it's sort of modeled after what the legislature did in 2019, and that for AOB. And it's really inherently meant to put some skin in the game. So the one-way attorney fee statute, for everybody to make sure that you understand how that works, is that, it is meant to level the playing field for the consumer, that to give them the opportunity to, go to court to handle a dispute with their insurer without fear of having to, pay the other side's attorney fees. Unfortunately, that has been, I would say, leveraged in this state by many on the trial bar side, that allows for a dispute to go to court, and if the company loses by a single dollar, so I always use just a basic example of the company offered 10,000, the demand was 20. And if it went all the way through the process and went to court, and ultimately the judge or jury found that neither side was right, but the right amount was $10,001.
Right.
Now, that's a little hyperbole, but that's just an example of how it works. If the plaintiff is awarded $1 more than what the insurance company offered, they get all of these fees. Well, that creates for a huge incentive for attorneys to bring claims, knowing that they can drag out litigation with the bar only needing to be $1 more than what was offered by the carrier. And so, we have seen some very egregious, awards where, there was a dispute over a couple of thousands of dollars. At the end of the day, the plaintiff, the homeowner, may have been awarded $40,000. And the attorney, once they get their fees and then ask the judge for a multiplier, and they get 2.5 times their lodestar fee, the attorney would be paid over $1 million on a $40,000 claim. And so, what does that do? I mean, it puts the companies in a situation of really having to make a business decision about litigation. Like, are we better off simply settling for an amount that we don't believe is correct? But that's better outcome than what may happen when we go to a jury. And so, and all of that bears itself out in rate. All of that bears itself out in the cost. So what this does is it creates kind of a sliding scale, and it's based off of, the final offer that is being made to the homeowner by the company, and the final demand. And whatever that difference is now falls in the scale of how you award attorney's fees.
Exactly.
And so if the award is 20% or less, then, so if, again, using that same example, if it was 10,000 that was offered and 20,000 that was demanded, if the final is $12,000 or less, there are no fees awarded whatsoever. And then between 20 and 50% of the offer, there's a sliding scale of a percentage of the fees that are provided. And then if the final judgment is, more than 50% of the company's original or final offer, then full fees are able to be collected. And so, I think that will have a meaningful impact on, the solicitation and really like mining of claims, and the incentive that was built into the system to just simply inflate the claim in order to be able to have some delta there that they could get all of their fees awarded. That's the trial bar, or they're masterful at talking about this in context of, this is about the consumer. This is about the consumer. That is so far from the truth. It's not about the consumer. It is about setting up a situation for them to be paid. And so many of those folks, and don't get me wrong, this isn't all attorneys. I mean, the sad thing about this is like 90% of all of the litigation that's going on in Florida is as a result of like 24 law firms that have made this is their business. to sue insurance companies and try to play this game. And so I think that it will meaningfully change just how they approach it and whether they're willing to take every case and inflate these claims. Because at the end of the day, the ultimate goal is to get the offer and the demand closer together.
Right, right.
And once you get the offer and demand closer together, there's a much, I believe, larger chance that you're going to have an agreement or an alternative dispute resolution that has an outcome that's good for the consumer and good for the company without having to litigate it.
Yeah, Patricia, again, we'll have more on this. I think what we're going to do on a lot of these questions, Kyle, is we'll get them to the team and we'll put an FAQ together and then get it out to the attendees for this, because a lot of great questions, a lot of good dialogue here. But one question, since you were talking about the multiplier, Kyle, was there any discussion that this could be addressed, taking it to the Supreme Court, elevating this situation?
Yes.
Okay.
So the multiplier is as a result of a case, I believe it's the Joyce case, that basically overturned what had been, the opinion in all 50 states and based on a federal opinion authored by Supreme Court Justice Scalia. And that is that it's only to be awarded in rare and exceptional circumstances. And as a result of the Joyce case here in Florida, that rare and exceptional was overturned. And so, yes, I believe that absent legislative change, there will likely be another case that works its way through the court system that ultimately goes through the appeals court and to the Florida Supreme Court that I think many, if not all, would agree that the court looks very different today than it did years ago as a result of nominations to the Supreme Court by current Governor DeSantis.
Yeah. All right. Well, folks, and we preface this at the onset. So we are going long. We continue to, finalize our last remarks on this. This has been recorded. So if you've got to jump off or you want staff to listen to this later, we'll certainly have it posted on our webpage, and you can listen to all the dialogue that we had today on these bills. But, BG, as we switch gears and bring up the last Senate Bill 54, motor vehicle insurance, certainly this got a lot of play towards the end of session. It certainly was discussed, but the bandwidth seemed to be all at the end. So kind of just give us a little backdrop on the PIP repeal bill and where we sit today.
This is one of those issues, and I remember going back to that conversation with Kyle earlier this summer. I'd come from a commercial carrier. However, they did have a personal lines auto company who did non-standard auto. Because of that, I've been very involved in the PIP conversations the past couple of years, and prior to that with
closer to the mic. There you go, BG. That's all right.
And I remember looking at Kyle and saying, "Am I going to have to talk about PIP?" and he said, our members for the most part, write at limits that are far above what's prescribed for in these bills. But inherently, with this being such a big issue that we won't be able to fully escape it, and that served to be accurate, especially as we move through the process. So after over 10 years of trying, the legislature has finally passed a bill, a mutually agreed bill, out of the legislature, and therein lies the question: does the governor sign it? And I'll tell you, it's I think if you ask most people who are close to this this issue, they'll likely tell you that their gut feeling tells you that they're going to veto it. I tend to fall in that camp, but only time will tell. But to understand why he may do that, you got to understand what's in the bill. The bill obviously repeals PIP, replaces with the mandatory limits of BI at 25 and 50, and then similar with PIP has an additional $5,000 death benefit. Property damage that was not changed, and that remained at $10,000. One of the things that was really debated on, and this issue brought so many stakeholders to the table. Obviously, carriers were the obvious one. This issue was largely being pushed by the trial bar, but because we were talking about PIP repeal, that brought doctors to the table, hospitals to the table, health plans to the table. and because they all had a vested interest in it. Taking away PIP, obviously first party coverage, that in some public policy makers' eyes, that left the first party in a situation where they may not have the coverage that they need. Certainly, I think that the health plans would probably agree with that, because they know they would now be on the hook for that, for those claims that were previously covered under PIP. So the bill changed over time. The House remained pretty consistent, and theirs is that, they wanted to send a bill forward that would have minimal rate increases for some, or they wanted to mitigate any type of exposure to seeing substantial rate increases. And certainly for drivers who were already insured at limits of 25 and 50 and BI, the argument can be made that, by no longer having to carry that additional PIP coverage, that their rates will go down, and they certainly wanted to be able to hold that position. So the House, throughout the entirety of the process, did not have a mandatory medical payments coverage requirement, which was in the Senate bill. What the two chambers ultimately negotiated out was a mandatory offer of med pay at $5,000 and $10,000 with no deductible. They did also give the agents and the carriers alike the opportunity to, after that offer, to offer medical payments coverage at $5,000 or above, with a deductible not to exceed $500. In looking at this, they looked at precedents, and they took a look at how we all handle UM/UIM coverage right now. Because it was a mandatory offer, they did put a deemer in there, and they said that if we do not have a signed denial of this coverage, that the policy is deemed to have $10,000 of med pay with no deductible. So the fear is on many is that they won't get those signed denials, and that'll become part of their policy, underlying policy, and net they'll stay at status quo. What I will tell you is that there's a tremendous amount of common law that really props up the PIP system. We've had things litigated such as reimbursement schedules, and there's a lot of that stuff that exists around around PIP that does not currently exist around mandatory offers. So you're certainly going to see as mandatory offer becomes much more commonplace across this state, that there's certainly going to be litigation surrounding how MedPay operates in the state. The other issue, this was addressed in both the PIP bill and in a separate bill that actually passed as well, Senate Bill 420, which dealt with named driver exclusions. So obviously now for a carrier to exclude somebody from the policy, you really had to hit two thresholds. You had to have a consent from the primary or from the named policy driver, and also had to provide proof that the excluded individual had gotten coverage elsewhere. Both this bill and the standalone bill in Senate 420 takes away both of those responsibilities. They no longer have to get the consent of the policy owner, and they no longer have to get proof of coverage for that excluded individual. And then the next issue was really the big issue. As we've looked at PIP over the past few years, as we move away from PIP, which was intended to be a limited tort system, albeit it was litigated every day and twice on Sunday, by virtue of moving into a full liability system, one has to assume there's going to be more litigation. I mean, that's just the facts. So the Senate's language on bad faith reforms kind of evolved over time. And as I mentioned earlier, the House had a much softer position on MedPay. They had no position up until the final days and weeks of session on bad faith reforms. As Kyle mentioned earlier, the legislature is typically reactionary, and they don't like to seek out reforms for a problem that may arise. But knowing that, we're going to a full liability system, that there would be a lot of litigation, they ultimately made an agreement that they would have some type of bad faith reforms. Many of those in the industry will tell you that these fall short of being meaningful bad faith reforms. Many of the provisions really do codify case law that has kind of created problems, or codified the case law that's created the problems in the underlying system. So only time will tell if these bad faith reforms have a meaningful impact. There are many in the industry that would suggest to you that taking that driver who before this bill was passed was covered at, 100, 300 of BI, and, denying the medical payments coverage, that you can make the assumption that their rates would go down, operating in a bubble that you could say that. However, many people believe that the way that these bad faith reforms kind of ended and what was ultimately passed will quickly eat up any chances of those savings from no longer having to carry PIP. As part of that, the bad faith reforms on the Senate floor were completely upended in the final weeks of session, and they completely rewrote the bad faith reforms. And part of that, they actually brought agents into the fold. And essentially what they did is they created a list of guidelines for carriers to follow. And the hope is that if they followed those, they would have some type of safe harbor from a bad faith action brought against them. But we won't get into that. And certainly if you have any questions on how that may operate, I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards. But what that did is it put an onus on agents to be more involved in the claims process and reporting of claims. Many of us are doing it, but it tied it to the bad faith action. So we actually, FAI, I'm proud to say, was one of the only insurance interest groups to get some reforms done on this bill. And we worked with the sponsor of the House bill, and Aaron Grail, to make sure that we provided clarity that nothing in the bill was intended to increase or diminish liability that currently exists on agents as it relates to reporting claims to carriers. So that was a big win for us. We were excited to get that done. But now comes the time where we all speculate on what the governor may do. And again, if I'm to give my final here on this issue, when you just take a look at it, at these minimum limit drivers, by virtue of them having to carry additional coverage that they weren't currently required to cover, it's just a fair assumption to say their rates will go up. And in many instances, those are individuals who are purchasing minimum limits because they don't have the ability or the means to purchase additional coverage. So time will tell, but we'll certainly be on the lookout on that and keep you apprised as that bill makes it over to the governor.
I mean, let's just, do you think the governor signs it?
No.
You heard it here first.
I don't like to give definitives, but I feel fairly certain on that one. He's not going to sign that bill.
I mean, it's universal that our company partners are in opposition to the bill, and nearly almost every carrier that I am aware of is advocating for the governor to veto the bill. And so despite the fact that this was viewed as a big win for the trial bar that they've been trying to get done for a long time, everyone in our world is advocating for the bill to be vetoed.
And not just our world, but as we mentioned, the healthcare world. I mean, PIP was a guaranteed of up to $10,000 of coverage if someone does not have med pay. You look at the health plans, they're going to be on the hook for those claims if they don't have first party coverage. And so, they, of course, were advocating for mandatory coverage and med pay, and, that didn't happen. So it's, as Kyle mentioned, it's carriers across the board, but it's other interested parties who are also calling for a veto on that bill as well.
Well, thanks, BG, and certainly Kyle weighing in on the validity or the what the governor will do on this. But folks, thanks for staying with us. A lot of great information. Certainly, for those that may have missed some of our publications, we are going to have an in-person convention this year in June. You see it up there on the screen. May 24th is kind of the early bird cutoff for registration. So certainly encourage you to book your room and register for this great event. But we're taking, not only we're going to have great sessions, great speakers, great camaraderie, but certainly we're going to take all the precautions necessary to have a safe event. So if you have any questions about that, certainly reach out and let us know. There's stuff on our website, but we take everybody's safety first, and so encourage you to take a look. And then the last thing I'll say is BG and Laura and the team will be at convention doing the 5-hour update, so they'll be able to certainly go into some more detail on some of the provisions of these bills and answer some more questions. So if you're thinking about convention, certainly encourage you to get online today and register, book your room, and and then we'll see you down the road there. But thanks again for attending Friday Morning Live. We'll take a little time off through part of the summer with convention and some other things. So we'll be back with you soon. But again, thanks so much. This is being recorded. We'll have it posted for those that had to jump off the call or you want to share it with staff. So again, on behalf of Kyle Ulrich, B.G. Murphy, I'm Dave Newell. Have a great afternoon and enjoy this glorious day around the state of Florida. See you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.